What's up, everybody? In this video today, we are going to be talking about a couple of pieces of technology that we're going to be exploring over the next few series of videos and stuff like that. We're going to be talking about using Headless WordPress and the WordPress API, along with a plugin called WP GraphQL, as a headless CMS to essentially pass data down to a NextJS application. This video doesn't get too much into the code or into the weeds in actually how to set anything up. This is more just a primer to kind of explain the technology, talk about why we're using it and some of the potential benefits of using these technologies and stuff together. So I hope you enjoy. I finally had a chance to kind of like work with a headless WordPress and NextJS implementation through like a production application. So I kind of went through a lot of trials and tribulations figuring out what worked and what didn't work and the right and wrong ways to do things. And there are a lot. There's a lot of information. So this first video that I'm doing here is just going to be us kind of introducing the pairing of these two things and why it works, why we would do this, why it makes sense. To use WordPress is essentially a store, like a database, and only a database, and not necessarily let WordPress handle any of the front end rendering of an application through PHP or anything like that, but rather use WordPress as a data store, use it to essentially customize how any client or admin or content editor or anyone can leverage WordPress as a way to manage their content, but still have a React application, still do user management, and all of that type of stuff. So that is the goal for the stream today, is to just kind of walk through this and talk through. We're not going to be doing so much of the setup, although we might just get a basic pairing going between the two. But what I really want to do today is just nail down why we would use these two technologies together, and then the right ways to do certain things. And we'll look through some examples and some documentation and stuff, and kind of go from there. And then if we get into the actual code of it, then that's great. Otherwise, this will just kind of be like a loosely, informational stream that we talk through today. So in any case, I've got a few notes on the right-hand side of the screen here that I kind of want to walk through and just talk through these things a little bit. So first and foremost, I mean, any developer is going to have an opinion about what types of technology to use, about what they're going to have opinions about WordPress in general as a system as a whole, and you'll probably, I'm sure that there are lots of folks out there that would never in a million years even consider using WordPress to manage content, especially for a React application or a Next application or anything like that. So there's a couple of points that kind of come to my head. So me as a developer, I've been working with WordPress for like 8 or 9 years, something like that, which is a relatively long time. And in that time, I've tried countless other content management systems, and I've tried a few that are specific to like the Jamstack itself as well. So I've tried things like Contentful. There's the Netlify CMS. Try rolling your own. You name it, we've given it a shot, right? And the thing that I come back to time and time again with WordPress is WordPress does a really good job of allowing you as a developer and your user, the end user who inevitably is going to be managing this content, managing users on their site. If you don't work for a product, or if you yourself are not a person who's building the product, then odds are you're either working at an agency or you're the type of developer who works on a project for someone else and then hands that project over to either their team of developers or the business owner themselves, right? And more often than not, what I've run into, especially in my, in my experience with my business over the past little over a year now, most clients, especially the ones who are starting up or who have an idea for an app or want to just kind of get going, don't have a team of developers or even one developer that you can pass the project off to for them to maintain. There's a weird kind of like intersection middle ground of web development where we as developers, are supposed to package up this thing. We have no real stake in the company necessarily and its success, but obviously if you're trying to do the right thing as a person, you want to hand off a project to a client that they can take and then get filthy rich off of, or just do the greatest things in the world for society, or whatever the end goal of your client is. We, as these kind of like agency developers, want to package this thing up, hand it off to them, and then let it just live and evolve and grow. And if you build enough of a relationship with that client, they bring you in as the company or the agency who maintains that product for them until they get so big that they hire their own in-house development. So we sit at this intersection where we have to really balance a lot of different things for the client, in that we have to understand, okay, they're going to be editing this content and managing all of the users. We also want to make sure that we're using modern technologies and not building everything in tables for them or something like that, right? It's a terrible example because nobody builds anything in tables anymore, but you get what I'm saying. So to bring it back around to WordPress gives us as developers a really solid ability to kind of like customize meta, create custom post types, link things together, do taxonomies and page hierarchy, menu navigation management, pretty much all of the things that you would expect out of a content management system. Obviously, WordPress does it very well. They've been around for a long time. It's an open source project. A lot of people have done a lot of really good work to get WordPress to where it is now, especially the admin side of things. The management of content in WordPress feels relatively natural to a lot of people. There are a lot of folks who probably would have some aversion to Gutenberg as well, which is the kind of like custom content editor experience that WordPress has now that kind of pushes it a little bit more towards a page editor, like a page builder, something like you'd see on Squarespace or Wix or something like that, without being a bloated mess of a tool for doing that. So the reason that I bring this up is because it seems like that WordPress gets overlooked for this a lot. And one of the reasons that I really think that WordPress can do most, if not all, of the content management that a small application, or even a larger application, small to medium-sized application, would need. WordPress can do those things well for you if you know how to properly build in custom meta and all of that type of stuff into WordPress. So all of that said, the reason that I would like to explore WordPress as this kind of detached content management piece of the puzzle for the Jamstack application world that we live in now is for those reasons: the developer experience and the end user editor experience. I kind of jumped around like all of these points. I can kind of like expand on some of the competitors and stuff that I've had experience with. So like I mentioned, I've used the most extensive like Jamstack content management system that I've used is the Netlify CMS. And while the Netlify CMS serves a very good purpose and is well built and makes a lot of sense, it kind of sits at one end of the spectrum when it comes to customization, right? Like the Netlify CMS gives you a little bit of leeway to be able to create kind of different custom post types, but you don't have a lot of really good granular control about how content within those posts or pages or custom post types or whatever, how the content within each one of those things is managed, right? There's not a lot of customization options that you really get to kind of mess with, especially in the back end. Like as a developer, we're only exposed to Netlify CMS's UI, and we don't have a way to say, code into Netlify CMS a set of meta or a set of categories or taxonomy or something like that. We don't have the ability to do more complex programming within the CMS itself. And that's just one example. I've used Contentful sparingly. I haven't used it in a production. Is it Contentful or am I thinking of... there's Contentful, there's Prismic. All of those are relatively similar, I believe. I think Prismic is the one that I've used more. I'm sitting here thinking about this, and it doesn't really matter. But what most of these other, CMSs that are built for Jamstack applications, what they miss more than WordPress does is that kind of back end customization. It just seems like WordPress, even though the JavaScript folks will screech in pain because WordPress is built with PHP. It seems like most of these other content management systems built for Jamstack miss the developer experience of being able to modify the admin area and really use logic to build features that make sense for the kind of like the data structure and everything that your client needs, which at the end of the day, that's who this is for. And you kind of have to keep that in mind, no matter how many, big grand developer opinions you have about something. The person who's going to be using this at the end of the day is the editor or the admin. So that's the gist of the drawbacks of most of the other CMS systems that tout themselves as CMS systems for the Jamstack. They just miss a lot of the customization ability in the back end, and that bothers me. So as I was looking at things, trying my best to get away from WordPress, I just could not find something that kind of fit that need, or at least felt good, without rolling your own CMS, which a lot of time clients do not have the budget or timeline for. So something to consider. I see this on Twitter all the time of people like just trashing Gutenberg and not enjoying how it works or how it's built and stuff like that. Twitter's just hot drama central, period. So it doesn't really matter what subject you care about. You can find some Twitter hot drama about it. But I've spent a lot of time in my professional career over the past couple of years now working with Gutenberg. And it is an excellent system for building reusable components within a WordPress environment. We used to use Advanced Custom Fields all the time, and Advanced Custom Fields does a good job at solving the problems that it solves. But my prerogative as a developer myself is to be as Puritan as I possibly can be. So not leveraging plugins where I can, where it's sensible to not use plugins and stuff like that. So if Gutenberg is built into WordPress, I want to figure out the right way to use Gutenberg to make it work. And over the past couple of years, I think I've come up with a pretty decent system for creating a new Gutenberg block, getting it registered in the WordPress admin, and then feeding that out to the front end of the website. The benefit of Gutenberg, I think, is that it does tend to resonate with clients when you go to train them on how to manage their content, the system that you've built for them, and all of that type of stuff. Most clients tend to appreciate the kind of the visual aspect of Gutenberg and the ability for them to see the components that they are working with and get a rough estimation of what things are going to look like on the front end. One of the disclaimers that I always give clients when I talk to them about Gutenberg is the fact that Gutenberg is not a page editor like Squarespace or Wix. I use those things as examples for what it's just easier for people to relate that, Wix or Squarespace or something like that, to how to actually manage the content within Gutenberg. But it's not a one-to-one page builder. It is a good representation of what the content will end up looking on the front end before you actually look at it on the front end. So clients tend to understand and enjoy using Gutenberg once they've been trained on it. It can be a little bit tough to kind of get them onboarded, and it takes obviously some time of getting used to and playing around with it before you're truly comfortable with it. But these 2 points kind of go together. So Gutenberg, and then eventually once you've trained your clients on how to use the system that you built for them, they generally don't need to come back to you for small content edits and stuff like that, because they have the ability to edit almost everything right there in the back end of their CMS. So it's part of, again, some of the driving forces behind, as much as I hesitate or don't necessarily want to gravitate towards WordPress, it kind of, these facts pull you into kind of accepting WordPress as a pretty solid content management system for clients. I touched on this a little bit. WordPress gives us, hooks, filters, the ability to create custom post types, add custom meta to any of those post types, do, relation between whether it's tags or categories or a custom taxonomy or anything like that. The customization options that have been baked into the WordPress admin are, it's the result of however long WordPress has been out, right? Like 15 years or whatever it is, probably even longer than that. But the customization options that have been acquired and worked through and iterated on over however many years, really kind of speak to WordPress's efficacy around customization. The WordPress API by itself, however, it does feel a little bit like an afterthought. I will 100% admit that. I am by no means like a fanboy for any one technology. I've just used things that I enjoy, and then I tend to continue to use them until I find something better. So WordPress still does that for me, but I do 100% think that the WordPress API gets neglected more often than not. The way that you go about adding information to the WordPress API, which, in subsequent streams and videos and stuff, I'll kind of go through some of this stuff, but there are some pain points around adding some custom meta to the actual WordPress API so that it's available to whatever front-end technology you're using to consume that data, right? So by default, WordPress kind of has a set JSON structure that it outputs for the WordPress API. As soon as you start going in and doing some of those things that we like the customization options, you start adding meta, adding tables to the database, adding information to the back end that is not available to the front end by default. So you also have to end up writing some hooks and filters and stuff to actually push your newly created metadata from WordPress into WordPress's API so that information can be consumed. It 100% is a drawback of using WordPress, but if you're able to figure out a system and kind of establish some processes and stuff around how to get that data, that newly created metadata from your, PHP WordPress theme to the JSON API, then you kind of, you get in the workflow, you get in the habit of doing it, and it becomes not so terrible. There are certainly ways that the WordPress API can be improved, and I do think that it needs to take a little bit more precedence, I think it should be held a bit higher than it is right now, because it really does feel like an afterthought using the API as it is. As we get into this, we will see some ways to mitigate that a little bit by way of things like WP GraphQL, which is an awesome plugin for WordPress from someone I worked a little bit with, who's a super knowledgeable person. Jason, here, let's go to wpgraphql.com. We'll just Google it. Yeah. So WP GraphQL does a really good job of taking the WordPress API and then making it available as a GraphQL endpoint. Jason's done a really good job of creating hooks and filters that are sensible and relatively easy to use to add the metadata that you add to the WordPress admin into the actual GraphQL endpoint, so that you can hit that meta and kind of define it. I will say that as you get down into some more complicated technical relations between some of the data and stuff that you're trying to use, this is just something that's so, I think, new and not widely used enough to where there aren't a lot of really concrete examples when you run into problems. This is something that I experienced on a client project of mine, that it became very hard to find any information about some of these more complex processes or functionality and stuff that we were looking to do. It was all there. It just took a lot of trial and error to figure out, just because there wasn't a lot of examples or content out there for me to reference. So this is part of the reason why I'd like to do this as like a series, is so that I can hopefully put some of this information out into the world, and then it can be, helpful to someone, and then hopefully spark conversation, so that we can kind of really push the limits of how we use things like WP GraphQL, WordPress as a headless CMS, and then, the consumption engine on the front end, whether it's NextJS, vanilla React application, vanilla JavaScript, whatever you want to use as your front end application, kind of stretching the limits of all of those things to see what we can really do and manage with all of those tools. So that's one piece of the customization options, some of the drawbacks, a little bit of the gripes that I have with WordPress as a headless CMS around the API. The other kind of bullet point that I have here that's not, I mean, this isn't like, you must only ever use established software ever. That's absolutely not the point that I want to make here. But it does help to have an established framework or established technology that you can reference. You know, if you go to Stack Overflow or the WordPress specific version of Stack Overflow, I don't remember what the URL for it is. It doesn't matter. If you go to any of those places, you'll know that someone has worked on a problem that you may be having. So if you run into an issue around, creating custom meta for users or something like that, someone's tried to do that. There's a Stack Overflow comment chain about it that you can follow and try to figure out, and hopefully it leads you in the right direction. The information's out there. So that's the reason that I put established here, is just the sheer volume of available content for anyone working on a WordPress project to consume is enough to be able to make it, the barrier to entry, less difficult for most people. So yeah, while that is established on the WordPress side, the marriage of all of these technologies is not very well established, which is why there's not a lot of content around it, which is why some of these problems are a little bit more difficult to solve. So that pretty much covers why I think WordPress is still a good use as a headless CMS, as a store of data, as a way for clients to manage their content in a modern web application. Yeah, I think that covers that section. So as we get into this, there are several pieces of technology that make your life a lot easier when working with these pieces of technology. As I mentioned, I'm definitely a bit of a purist when it comes to the technology that I want to use. I choose the technology that I'm using very carefully, because I would much prefer to write it from scratch myself, if I have the time and the ability to do it. But there are a few things that you need to do in order to get your site or in order to get your WordPress site kind of ready to act as a store of data rather than an actual front-to-end facing website. There's a couple things that you have to run through, and in a subsequent stream we'll probably go through this in a little bit more depth, but through the use of like a blank theme or a headless specific WordPress theme, we can use tools like WP GraphQL to write those hooks and filters to essentially shape the API into whatever we need it to be for consumption on the front end. We did this a little bit a few months ago. But a couple of the things that I really wanted to go through and kind of expand on from there is how we actually end up getting the data and using it. So if we, for the sake of the video and kind of what we're doing here, we're going to be using Next as the primary means of consuming this data and presenting a front-end application. I personally, and I guess I'll go through this a little bit too before we move on to some of the examples and stuff, but Next as a framework has been around for a little while now. I think it's it's new-ish. I've seen Next in some shape or form for several years, but Next has really impressed me with the way that they've been kind of pushing their technology. They've got great documentation, really great examples. They have a GitHub repository that is just full of different different connections, different ways to use Next with any number of other frameworks, whether it's like user like login stuff or a payment API or anything. Their examples repo is huge and has a lot of really, really good information in it. But Next has really impressed me with how you're able to leverage their framework to kind of pick and choose whether or not you need certain data server-side rendered, statically generated. They have an entire system for more or less building an API within your Next application that can be used to consume data from anywhere, which is how we will be consuming data between the Next application on the front end and the WordPress API on the back end. So we kind of we have this Next API that sits more or less as a middleware and talks to the back end, consumes some data, shapes it for us, and then passes it on to the front end for us to actually consume and present to the user within the actual web application. So the fact that Next has all of these moving parts that are really well integrated with each other and super well built and documented. Next is just really, I've thoroughly enjoyed working with Next as a framework on its own. So again, if I can help it, if I had a choice or a preference or all the time in the world, right? Like, I would love to be able to build something like this, myself or from vanilla JavaScript or something like that. But the fact of the matter is most clients do not have that kind of time for me to be able to roll all of these systems into a custom, like, white labeled solution for them, right? So that's the drive, at least for using a framework like this. And like I said, when I pick a framework that I use, I'm generally pretty picky about it and use things that are well documented, well built, and I enjoy working with. So Next is one of those things, and that's kind of why we've chosen to go down this road. So that's a quick little overview of what we're going to be doing in these next few videos. I cut the video just a little bit short because we started getting into the weeds a little bit about some of the examples and stuff that exist in the NextJS repo. Not super pertinent to the conversation of what we're doing with that technology and stuff like that. But yeah, that should give us a primer for the next few videos. And if you got any questions or comments, definitely let me know. Thanks for watching, folks. Bye.